a WikiVidi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. For a Few Dollars More. For a Few Dollars More is a 1965 spaghetti western film directed by Sergio Leone. It stars Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef as bounty hunters, and Gian Maria Volonté as the primary villain. German actor Klaus Kinski plays a supporting role as a secondary villain. The film was an international co-production among Italy, West Germany, and Spain. The film was released in the United States in 1967, and is the second part of what is commonly known as the Dollars Trilogy, following A Fistful of Dollars and preceding The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The films catapulted Eastwood and Van Cleef into stardom. Film historian Richard Schickel, in his biography of Clint Eastwood, believed that this was the best film in the trilogy, arguing that it was more elegant and complex than A Fistful of Dollars and more tense and compressed than The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Director Alex Cox considered the church scene to be one of the most horrible deaths of any Western, describing Volonté Indio as the most diabolical Western villain of all time. Plot. The man many call Mancho is a bounty killer who makes a living collecting rewards issued for wanted outlaws, a profession shared by a former member of the army named Colonel Douglas Mortimer. Eventually, the two learn that a ruthless psychopath named El Indio was broken out of prison by his gang, slaughtering all but one of his jailers, while murdering the family of the man who captured him. Indio carries a musical pocket watch that was a memento of his youth, using it to time the duel. Flashbacks reveal that he had taken the watch from a young woman who had shot herself as he was raping her after having murdered her husband. The incident has haunted Indio, and he smokes an addictive drug to cloud his memory. Indio plans to rob the Bank of El Paso, which has a disguised safe containing almost $1 million. Mancho arrives in the town and becomes aware of Mortimer, who had arrived earlier. He sees Mortimer deliberately insult the hunchback Wild, who is reconnoitering the bank. Mancho confronts Mortimer after the two of you have studied each other, and they decide to work together as neither intends to back down. Mortimer persuades Mancho to join Indio's gang and get in between two fires. Mancho achieves this by freeing a friend of Indio from prison despite Indio's suspicions. Indio sends Mancho and 3 others to rob the bank in nearby Santa Cruz. Mancho guns down the 3 bandits and sends a false telegraphic alarm to rouse the El Paso sheriff and his posse, who ride to Santa Cruz. The gang blast the wall at the rear of the El Paso bank and steal the safe, but are unable to open it. Groggy is angry when Mancho is the only one to return from Santa Cruz, but Indio accepts Mancho's version of events thanks to Mortimer having given Mancho a convincing wound. Mancho manages to convince the gang to ride to the small border town of Agua Caliente rather than travel through Rio Bravo. Mortimer, who anticipated Mancho would deviate from their planned ambush, is already there. Wild recognizes Mortimer, forcing a showdown that results in the hunchback's death before Mortimer offers his services to Indio to crack open the safe without using explosives. Indio locks the money in a strongbox and says that the loot will be divided after a month. Mancho and Mortimer break into the strongbox and hide the money, only to be caught immediately afterwards and beaten up. Mortimer has secured the strongbox lock, however, and Indio believes that the money is still there. Later that night, Indio has his lieutenant Nino kill a guard stationed to guard Mancho and Mortimer with a knife belonging to Cuccio. Once Nino frees the prisoners, Indio reveals that he knew they are bounty hunters and executes Cuccio to make it appear he betrayed the gang, while sending his men after Mancho and Mortimer in hopes they would all kill each other so that he can split the money just between Nino and himself. But Groggy realizes the scheme and forces Indio to open the strong box after killing Nino, only for the two to find the money not there. Eventually, after he and Mancho kill the bandits, Mortimer calls out Indio while revealing his full name. Mortimer shoots Groggy as he runs for cover, but is disarmed by Indio, who plays the pocket watch while challenging the bounty hunter to regain his weapon and kill him when the music ends. But as the music ends, the same tune begins from an identical pocket watch which Mancho had pilfered from Mortimer. Mancho gives his own gun belt and pistol to Mortimer, saying, "Now we start." The music plays to completion and Mortimer shoots first, killing Indio. Mortimer takes Indio's watch and Mancho remarks on Mortimer's resemblance to the woman in the photographs. Mortimer reveals himself as her brother. His revenge complete, Mortimer declines his share of the bounty and leaves. Mancho tosses the bodies of Indio and his men into a wagon, finally adding Groggy's body after killing him, and rides off, pausing to recover the stolen money from its hiding place. Development. After the box office success of A Fistful of Dollars in Italy, director Sergio Leone and his new producer, Alberto Grimaldi, wanted to begin production of a sequel, but they needed to get Clint Eastwood to agree to star in it. Eastwood was not ready to commit to a second film, when he had not even seen the first. Quickly, the filmmakers rushed an Italian-language print of Per un pugno di dollari to him. The star then gathered a group of friends for a debut screening at CBS Production Center and, not knowing what to expect, tried to keep expectations low by downplaying the film. As the reels unspooled, however, Eastwood's concerns proved to be unfounded. The audience may not have understood Italian, but in terms of style and action, the film spoke volumes. Everybody enjoyed it just as much as if it had been in English, Eastwood recalled. Soon, he was on the phone with the filmmaker's representative. "Yeah, I'll work for that director again," he said. Charles Bronson was again approached for a starring role, but he passed, citing that the sequel's script was like the first film. Instead, Lee Van Cleef accepted the role. Eastwood received $50,000 for returning in the sequel, while Van Cleef received $17,000. Screenwriter Luciano Vincenzoni wrote the film in 9 days. However, Leone was dissatisfied with some of the script's dialogue, and hired Sergio Donati to work as an uncredited script doctor. Production. The film was shot in Almeria, Spain, with interiors done at Rome's Cinecittà Studios. The production designer Carlo Simi built the town of El Paso, in the Almeria desert. It still exists, as the tourist attraction Mini Hollywood. The town of Agua Caliente, where Indio and his gang flee after the bank robbery, is Albury Cox, a small Pueblo Blanco, on the Niger Plain. Post-production. As all of the film's footage was shot MOS, Eastwood and Van Cleef returned to Italy where they dubbed over their dialogue, and sound effects were added. Although it is explicitly stated in the movie that the Colonel Mortimer character is originally from the Carolinas, Van Cleef opted to perform his dialogue using his native New Jersey accent rather than a Southern accent. Music. The musical score was composed by Ennio Morricone, who had previously collaborated with director Leone on A Fistful of Dollars. Under Leone's explicit direction, Morricone began writing the score before production had started, as Leone often shot to the music on set. The music is notable for its blend of diegetic and non-diegetic moments through a recurring motif that originates from the identical pocket watches belonging to El Indio and Colonel Mortimer. "The music that the watch makes transfers your thought to a different place," said Morricone. "The character itself comes out through the watch, but in a different situation every time it appears." A soundtrack album was originally released in Italy by RCA Italiana. In the United States, Hugo Montenegro released a cover version, as did Billy Strange and Leroy Holmes, who released a cover version of the soundtrack album with the original American poster art. Maurizio Graf sang a vocal, Occhio per Occhio, / Eye for an Eye, to the music of the Q. 60 Seconds to What track that did not appear in the film, but was released as a tie-in 45 revolutions per minute record. Box office. For a Few Dollars More was released in Italy in December 1965 as Per Qualche Dollaro in Più. In the United States, the film debuted on the 10th of May 1967, 4 months after the release of A Fistful of Dollars, grossing $5 million. At the time of its Italian release, the film proved to be even more commercially successful than its predecessor. By 1967, the film became the highest-grossing film of any nationality in the history of Italian cinema. It was the 7th most popular movie at the French box office in 1966, after La Grande Vadrouille, Dr. Zhivago, Is Paris Burning?, A Fistful of Dollars and Lost Command and A Man and a Woman. Critical reception. It initially received mediocre reviews from critics. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times said, "The fact that this film is constructed to endorse the exercise of murderers, to emphasize killer bravado and generate glee and frantic manifestations of death is, to my mind, a sharp indictment of it as so-called entertainment in this day." Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times described the film as one great old Western cliché after another, and that the film is composed of situations and not plots. The film has since grown in popularity, while also gaining more positive feedback from contemporary critics. The review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes reports a 94% approval rating with an average rating of 7.8 based on 33 reviews. The website's consensus reads, with Clint Eastwood in the lead, Ennio Morricone on the score, and Sergio Leone's stylish direction. For a Few Dollars More earns its recognition as a genre classic. In a retrospective review of the Dollars trilogy, Paul Martinovic of Den of Geeks said, For a Few Dollars More is often overlooked in the trilogy, awkwardly sandwiched between both the original film and the best known, but it's a stunning film in its own right. Paolo Sardinas of MovieWeb said, Eastwood gives it his all and turns in another iconic performance along with scene stealer Lee Van Cleef, who helps make For a Few Dollars More twice as good as its predecessor. British journalist Kim Newman has pointed out that the film changed the way bounty hunters were viewed by audiences. It moved them away from a profession to be ashamed of, one with a lower than a card sharp on the Western scale of worthwhile citizens, to one of heroic respectability. Brought to you by Wikividi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?